Welcome to Choosing to Matter Cocktails with Chris, a space for open, honest, and unhurried conversations. In today's episode, we sit down with someone who's shaping our world with purpose and passion. I'm your host, Chris Lubkeman. Join me as we explore how our guest has chosen and chooses to matter. Dear listeners, for today's conversation, I am joined by Anna Rold, media executive, founder, and CEO of Diplomatic Courier and World in 2050. We've invited Anna to share her journey as a writer, speaker, thought leader in global affairs, and the creator of platforms that foster dialogue and innovation around the most pressing global challenges and opportunities of our time. So welcome, Anna, to our podcast.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
It is a real pleasure to have you here with me. So, Anna, if you met somebody on the street, how would you explain to them what you do?
Oh, such a good question, because I struggle explaining this to my own kids and family.
Yeah, I am very empathetic with this one.
So officially, I'm a publisher and the owner of a media company, but just the media business has evolved so much from in the last 20 years. So I began this company 20 years ago when print media was sort of in decline and digital media was rising, was just starting. So it was the birth, 2006 was the birth of my company, and it was also the birth of Facebook and Twitter and all the platforms we know now. And so what I do is a combination of things, but it's thought leadership, advancing global discourse in some of these topics. And so the best way I could describe is matchmaking for thought leaders, is bringing thought leaders together, talking about the issues that matter and figuring out if there is a way to create collective intelligence around solution making. And so the publication and the media assets around Diplomatic Courier and World in 2050 are meant to facilitate that global dialogue. So unlike other media companies, we don't have a newsroom, so we don't break news, we don't write about the news, we analyze the news, and we do a little bit of strategic forecasting around that.
That's really fascinating, and especially when you're sitting there looking at the differentiation today, when you said how things have changed with time between, I'll put truth in quotes, and what's true, and how you understand what's true or truth and what's an untruth. And so how do you, I'm kind of curious how you, in your career now since 2006, has changed a lot.
Well, we're actually learning quite a bit about this with the group in our expert network that deals with both how technologies are shifting the industry and our perception of information and how we consume it, because the past 20 to 30 years have been sort of the crux of the information economy. So it's all about consuming and producing information. We're all doing this because technology facilitated that in an exponential way, more so than any other time in human history. So we've grappled with misinformation and disinformation quite a bit, especially because the tool set to distribute that is much more efficient and at scale than it was ever before. Yeah. And what we've learned is that there are universal truths. And I think even though truth seems to be sort of either in decline or under attack right now, or under threat, we all do know that there are fundamental truths. We believe them, we know them, we might dispute them, but that's not because we don't believe that something is true or not. What we've learned, especially in the past year, doing some research around misinformation, is let's say that we have a tool that tells us something is undeniably true. It's not synthetic. And we're going to deal with that issue quite a bit in the next couple of years, Chris, because what's on the internet, the most of the information we're consuming is going to be synthetic or a hybrid of true or something that was humanly created or not. And so if we have a tool that tells us this is real or not, will that be enough for us to accept it as truth? And I would say initially, yes, a blue check mark would help, right? But that's not enough because now the blue check mark is not enough, doesn't give you enough authority. And even if it does, depending on the platform, we may believe it or not, or we may accept it or not, which I think is even more important. So I think what's going to happen next is narratives. How do we see narratives shaping? Because
Mhm.
your belief system and your narrative is what allows you to accept a truth
Mhm.
and distribute it.
Yeah.
So I think what we really need to be looking at right now is what gives people these narratives, what helps people um, go from one narrative to another.
Mhm.
And that will help us figure out how we preserve truth
Yeah.
more so now than ever
So
before. But
it's
I don't think we're dealing with something different now than we dealt before.
interesting. Good. I mean, it's interesting for me to hear that from you, that you said at the last statement. Well, we've had to deal with this in the past. This is nothing brand new. We just have a different parameters, perhaps a different speed, a few other factors, but it's been around for a while. Just as I know, you have suggested a favorite cocktail for choosing tomato cocktails with Chris. So, what is it? And just tell me about it. What is it?
Right. So I picked the Cape Cod. Are you familiar with it?
Ah, well, it seems to be it's a little tiny place on the eastern coast of the United States of America, I think, isn't it?
Yes. So when I first moved to America, I moved to Boston. I went to college there. So my first time having a cocktail with friends was the Cape Cod because that was the quintessential Boston drink, right? It's just cranberry juice and vodka, really. It's like, and really the good things in life are simple, right?
This is so
It's
true.
not complicated,
So true.
you know. It was really one of my first drinks. And for me, it's special because it reminds me of that carefree time in college and it really smells and tastes like Boston. And I don't drink as much now in terms of cocktails or hot drinks, but I do like I find water a little bit boring, just like my kids. I have to be reminded to drink it. And so I have to put a splash of cranberry juice in it.
That's great. That's wonderful. I think we both happen to have one with us. So here it is, the Cape Cod cranberry juice and vodka. And Anna, to a wonderful day and to a wonderful future. Here we go. Bottoms up.
Cheers.
I haven't had cranberry very much. It's quite tart, I have to say. I've forgotten how tart cranberry is, and it's supposed to be quite good for you. So it's very healthy. That's really great.
It also depends which cranberry juice you're drinking, because here in America, it can be quite sugary.
Ah, okay. Well, mine is not. Mine's a bio in Switzerland. Makes my lips turn inside out. So, so here we go. Well, Anna, you currently live in Washington, D.C., but that's not where you were from. It's not where you were born. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
So the short version of the life story is I was born in Albania during communism. My family fled the country. The Iron Curtain had already fallen in most of Eastern Europe, but Albania was a little bit slow in joining the group.
Yeah.
So we fled Albania, moved to Greece, lived there for several years. So my formative teenage years were there. And we then moved to the United States. And as I said, I spent my college years in Boston. I moved here as a teenager, about 3 months shy of turning 18.
Mm.
And the rest is history. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's the short version, not the dramatic version of the life story.
Well, and all of the listeners can imagine or can try to imagine, and very few, I cannot, I've never been a refugee. I cannot truly empathize. I can try, but I can't because I don't know what it's like. But not easy when you're a teenager to leave everything that you knew. So how did it change your worldview to do what you're doing today?
Well, I think about it how I felt back then versus how I feel now that I'm sort of in a similar age my parents were when they
Hmm.
moved, although my kids are older than we were when we moved. Um, and I think about how dramatic that must have been to just kind of leave everything behind, take a huge risk and flee not knowing where you're going, just hoping for the best. And it's a pretty difficult thing to imagine. I imagine how you have to keep a very brave face for your kids, obviously. They can't see what you're going through.
Yeah.
But when I was a child, my parents did their very best to protect us, even
Hmm.
during a very crazy time. And it instilled in me. So you have to kind of know what Albania was like back in those days. So when we moved to Greece, Chris, it was like traveling in time. We went from something that looked black and white in the 60s into
Hmm.
Technicolor, going from paying for things with coupon like with you're allowed with rations, we were allowed to buy this much food for a family of four, to abundance, to go into a supermarket for the first time. That's just insane for a kid to look at, like going from that kind of a huge change. So for me it was the kind of opportunity to see that both worlds
Huh.
exist, and it creates a kind of a maturity that a kid at 10, for example, couldn't possibly have, the kind of nuance you couldn't possibly have at 10, but you're forced to have. So it's not the kind of thing I wish on everybody. So for me,
Hmm.
this was a positive because it shaped me later on in life to be the kind of person who didn't think boundaries existed,
Hmm.
right? Because these boundaries had fallen, and I could see that you could go from something really, really small to something huge in just no time. And it helped me appreciate what my parents had done for me,
Hmm.
because again, they could have stayed,
Sure.
but they really wanted something better for their kids.
Yeah.
And that was a huge sacrifice. It shaped me as a
Sure.
parent later on as well.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Anna. That's really incredible. It's also, you said those boundaries are like essentially we meaning Homo sapiens made those boundaries, and your parents transcended those boundaries. And it sounds like with Diplomatic Courier, what, as I understand, a lot of your mission is also trying to transcend boundaries as well, and making blurring that, and trying to analyzing them. Would that be fair?
I would say yes. When I started Diplomatic Courier, the mission was to close boundaries, to close gaps, to become sort of in. And it's funny
Hmm.
because a lot of people think Diplomatic Courier is an embassy publication. And sure, we reach diplomats as well, but it's just one portion of our audience. The idea behind it was to become an interlocutor,
Hmm.
close the gap between what leaders are saying and doing,
Yep.
and demystifying that for global publics. So it's making diplomacy more understandable for a larger audience. It's making, demystifying what policy is doing to businesses or to business leaders and vice versa, creating that kind of a dialogue. And back in 2006, it didn't
Hmm.
exist. Diplomacy and policy, those were very wonky types of areas to get into, and they existed for very high level leaders. And again, that's also our clientele and our audience, but it's not our only audience.
Hmm.
So that's what I was trying to do with Diplomatic Courier. And I hope that we have managed to achieve a degree of that. Obviously, things changed dramatically in the 20 years that we were doing that, because now, as I said, you see a democratization of access to information. So, but when we started, that kind of information was siloed and was behind closed doors.
Fascinating. It's really I mean, really fascinating to me, especially you have been in the midst of a communication revolution, evolution, as in your life, you also experience this evolution, revolution through the travels, which in your journey. So would you say it was fate or design what brought you to be the CEO of Diplomatic Courier?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not a big believer of fate, but I do believe that sometimes cosmic forces conspire, right? You have to believe a little bit of that. You have to believe in a little bit of magic, right? Um, I don't know, but I do believe that necessity is the mother of invention.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just graduated from with my master's in diplomacy and negotiations, and I felt that there was a missing link in how we did diplomacy and public discourse. And so I felt nobody else is doing it. Oh, I should go and do it. And I think going back to that, being a migrant, being a refugee, like, okay, well, sure, I should try it. What's the worst that could happen? It also helped that I was only 25 at the time, didn't know what failure was.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, you were an entrepreneur before being an entrepreneur was cool.
It's true. I have to say, I when I told my parents that I wasn't going to take any of the job offers and I was going to go over here and start this company, the first question was, well, who's going to pay for your health insurance?
And you're,
Those are the kinds of things parents are worried about with very good reason.
but if we go back before that, when you were going into college, what did Anna want to do? What was your vision of what Anna's life was going to become?
Well, I must have changed my mind on careers like 4 times just freshman year in college.
Okay.
And I say this because my kids are thinking right now, they're at that age where they're thinking about what job and career and all of that. And my answer to them is, well, take a gap year and think about it. Because at 18, how are you supposed to know,
Mhm.
right? I knew I wanted to go to college because that is, sort of your ticket to social advancement, right?
Yeah.
To being educated was everything, especially if you're a child of immigrants.
Mhm.
That is the one they instill in you. But honestly, Chris, I change my mind all the time. And I remember having conversations about the future of work and the future of jobs. I ask people this on panels all the time. What was your first job? My first job as a teenager in America was pumping gas. Well, that job doesn't exist anymore
Yeah, exactly.
because that was the job I could do early in the morning before going to school for extra cash, right? So I think not being very sure about it and kind of going with the flow was being agile,
Hmm.
was actually the thing that helped me in building the portfolio career that I have now.
Yeah.
And I think it was hard when we were in college, when you and I were in college, because you were supposed to pick a lane and go become the best at it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's untrue now, but I think now our kids need to have more agility in
Hmm.
how they pursue their careers because their careers are going to change. I mean, if you have an idea about what you want to do now as a high school junior or senior, by the time you graduate high school in a year or two, things will have changed so
Yeah.
dramatically that you need to be amenable.
Yeah. That's very, very true. I appreciate that. My first job was throwing newspapers. Literally, it was a classic, almost, you know,
Yeah.
throwing them up on a bicycle. I literally did. So Norman Rockwell, there you are, Tunk. And that job doesn't exist
Yeah.
either. At least in some parts of the world, our jobs both still exist. Right? And this is what's interesting about the differences in reality around the world. Right? And this is, I'm sure you've traveled quite a lot, and you think about different places you've seen, people you've spoken with, and about how they see the future, how you see the future, how the future looks for kids. Tell me a little bit about the future which you have seen through the eyes of others, and that's appealing to you.
Well, I'll I'll tell you first what I see in countries where technology has overtaken everything, made everything super efficient and um, easy and cheap, versus countries where technology hasn't done that yet.
Great.
I don't necessarily think that we're living a better future here versus in countries where, I mean, we're over here talking about the difference between the rocket ship and the horse and cart. And there are countries in the world that they're iterating on the horse and cart, where we're over here talking about, missions to Mars. And that kind of a disparity is actually quite problematic,
Hmm.
especially when we in some of these countries where we talk about rocket ships are offering rocket ship solutions to countries like that.
The future is very often said it's already here. It's just unevenly distributed. And so when we look around the world and you travel a lot, you talk to people all over the world. Where do you see these different futures, and how do you see our future evolving?
Okay, so it's interesting because you and I are in that future strategic forecasting space. And I often tell people that talking about the future is not about talking with something distant that hasn't happened yet.
Hmm.
I, as a futurist, I love talking about the present.
Hmm.
And as you probably know, Chris, and I talk about this quite often in my own speeches out there and keynotes, I'm a big science fiction nerd. I love science fiction. And if I could quote science fiction movies and stories about everything that's happening in life, right? It's
Yep.
everything. So one of my favorite series, for those that are listening that haven't seen it before, is the Back to the Future trilogy. And they're just such fun movies. They have a time machine, they go to the past, to the future, and chaos ensues, of course. It's hilarious. But one of the things we think when that I think about as a futurist, quote unquote, is when they travel to the past. I don't know if you remember sort of the plot line, but they're terrified about doing anything in the timeline that when they travel to the past, because that has a huge effect, cascading effect, on how it's going to change the future. And I always think about this as someone who does strategic forecasting, just like you, Chris.
Hmm.
We don't think in the present the same way. Like that every single little step or decision we make, every little thing we do, as small as it seems, seemingly, it has a huge cascading effect for the future. When you change your mindset and you think that way, when you think about the present as such an important part of the futures timeline, then you change your behavior, you change how you do things. Everything matters so much. So that's one way I wanted to say that, because to me,
Mm.
that's a very important distinction about the future. Now, when it comes to the disparity of how people live, across the world, I've seen the two extremes, as I was saying, seeing the people over here iterating on the rocket ship and the people over here iterating on the horse and cart, and both realities exist in this day
Yeah.
and age. We still
Yeah.
have nearly half the world who doesn't even have access to internet, which I think that's inconceivable in this day and age, right? That we have half the world's population not accessing internet. Um, but I do think that just because hyper access and hyper technology has made things so efficient and so easy and so cheap in certain parts of the world, it doesn't mean that we have a better quality of life. In fact, in some situations, I think it's quite the opposite. And I think the future is one where you will see the analog coming in. I think making things too efficient, for example, with algorithm, I see this in my own industry in media. Um, One of the reasons the media industry has devolved, um, and is going where it's going, and things have been so difficult, it's because things have been made too efficient. It used to be that we would create once and then distribute a million times. And we had a shared experience of what was the news,
Mhm.
right? We
Yep.
all read the front page together. We all experienced, we had a shared cultural, political, social experience together.
Yep. Hmm.
We don't have that anymore because the algorithm made that super efficient. So now we're iterating and we're creating as content creators for an audience of one. And the audience of one is awful, you know,
Yep.
because the algorithm and that one person, if we're catering to every single person individually, we're not catering to the truth, which you mentioned earlier, part of the reason we're dealing with this post-truth society is because technology is making things too efficient. So I think the future looks like something in between. Just like when we do strategic forecasting, we're not looking to predict a certain future. We're looking to predict multiple futures,
Hmm.
and so that we can be prepared to face them.
It's quite, thank you. And that's quite interesting to think about the shared experience and what the shared experience means for creating culture. Because a culture is shared understanding. And how we have the vision of the future, which you and I can both share by having had common experiences or not. And if we don't have a shared understanding, what does that mean for the future? You know?
Well, this is the million dollar question right now,
Hmm.
right? It's a great
Yeah.
question. It's hard to answer. And this is why I
Hmm.
go back to my diplomacy roots. Um, I'll tell you a
Hmm.
story. My very first class in negotiations, I tell this story quite a few times, um, was to learn how to do basic negotiations, right? And I was paired with someone else in my class. Our professor looked at us and said, "Oh, these two should fight it out together," and gave us an orange and gave us instructions on how to negotiate for how we're going to split that orange. And we split it, and my secret instructions were that I needed the pulp, and his secret instructions were that he needed the rind. But because we were both so incredibly alpha and we needed to win, we went into it thinking we're going to negotiate and get the whole thing, right? And so while everyone else had completed the assignment, we were still sitting there half an hour later trying to figure out why we couldn't come to an agreement. And the first lesson you learned in negotiation one-on-one is figuring out your shared values. How do you
Yeah.
come to an agreement
Mm.
together is by asking each other questions, is by figuring out how to enhance the proverbial pie. By asking questions, I would have found out pretty quickly that I didn't need the rind at all, or that he only needed the rind, and if I could just give that to him, we would have had a successful um, outcome. And that happens in real life too. It happens in,
Yeah.
when you negotiate with your landlord or at your job, when all the way to very complex peace treaties and agreements, interlocutors or facilitators, they go in there with the thinking that somebody's going to give up a little something to come to a shared agreement. So I go back to these, how do we create
Hmm.
shared understanding so that we can come into an agreement? Because not everything in life is about winning it all. And I don't know that anybody wants to win it all. It's not a
Sure.
zero-sum game. Nothing in life is, right?
No, 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 not at all. It can't be. Nature is not a zero sum, and
Exactly.
we're all part of the natural system. And the more
Right.
we think about that, I think the better it is. So when we think about the future, though, if we think about the future, what excites you? There's a lot of things to be concerned about, but what excites you about the potential of tomorrow? Not just today. I hear what you said about today, but what about the day after tomorrow or 10, 20, 30? What excites you?
Well, this goes back to when I was a child, when things were hard. I was always excited by the future because I knew the hard times have an expiration date, right? Just like the good times, like things have a
Hmm.
cycle about them. And I think life is a cycle too. So when there's bad times, I always think about, well, soon these bad times will go. And it's true. Things do always shift and change. Um, it's hard to not be optimistic about the future because I see my kids right now as teenagers, and they're incredibly, optimistic about their future. And I know that there's statistics and data out there that say they're not, and they're thinking about life differently. But at the same time, they're young and they
Mhm.
think they can fix things that we messed up for them. So that to me is a good thing, is an exciting thing. Um, so for me, the future has always been an exciting thing because it means that a cycle is ending, a new cycle will begin, right? Now, there's lots of indications, as you and I both know, that it's going to be a hard time for a lot of people. It's not going to be as easy. So it's not as rosy as I would
Mhm.
like to think or you would like to think. So for me as a futurist or a forecaster, it's about preparation. What can we do to prepare so that that desirable future arrives well? And as you know, that's our motto at World in 2050, helping the future arrive well. And it really guides everything that we do. So the future is exciting because we
Mhm.
make it exciting. It's going to
Yeah.
be good because we'll make it good. You wrote an interesting cover story with Jonelle a few years ago. I don't know if you remember it, for Diplomatic Courier, and it was, the cover story was World in 2050, and I think you did four scenarios. What
Mhm.
happens if, imagine these four futures, and then after you've imagined them, the good, the bad, and the in between, what is it that we can do to get there?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that was an inspiration for me as well.
Mhm. Well, thank you for that. I think that's really true. And to look at not to look at the future through rose-colored glasses, but to look at the future as to where we want to go and and how we get there, because there can be sort of bad futures and it can be good futures. And then the question is, how do we get to one or how do we get to the other?
Well, we know we can get to the other one pretty easy if we just keep going this way. We
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
the
yeah.
other the one that's pretty dystopian, or variations of the dystopian one. We're on a good path to going there. So the question is, can we imagine different futures, and what do we need to do to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we think about what we're doing to get there, how how would you say that you are are helping this process? So what are you doing to choose to matter? Right? Because this is the
Mhm.
name of this podcast, is choosing to matter. How would you say that?
Well, it resonated with me when you said that because I've always chosen to matter, even when the circumstances around me said I didn't. I always chose, and I think it's everyone's sort of innate nature and responsibility to feel that way. Because again, no matter how small, we play part of an ecosystem. We are part of a
Mhm.
big cosmic puzzle. So my part is facilitating the dialogue that can get us there, bringing smart people together and figuring out how to turn those words into actions. And that's where you and I have become friends over the years because we have a
Mhm.
very similar way of thinking in doing that. And I don't think it's the kind of thing that I'm the only one that's doing it. I would hope not. I think there's several people out there that are doing, that have the talent and the will and the resources to do this. And I think we just need more of those people because the scalability for this is very different than other
Mhm.
endeavors. It can't be scaled by technology. It's a very analog process, and finding the magic and the rare gems in these conversations, in these moments, we have to manufacture some of that serendipity, right? So it's our job as conveners to do that. But I think the more people do that, the more we can teach others to do that, the better, because I think
Mhm.
It's the only thing we haven't figured out how to quite scale.
Hmm.
It can be very
Yeah.
powerful.
I hear you very much. It resonates very much with me, and I think it's very important. It's analog and it's, yeah, each community, each person, as you said earlier, has to understand the presence. And the decisions we make today impact tomorrow profoundly. So
Yeah.
how we choose each day to live our days, and we think about that.
Absolutely.
So you said you're a science fiction fan. So what would be the three movies that you suggest everybody should see? You've already said, okay, so we've got Back to the Future, one, two, three. Okay, we got Back to the Future. What would you say? Yeah, there's your three. But okay, I want another two.
Okay. Oh my gosh, I need to Google stuff now, Chris.
No, you don't. No, you don't. Just off the top of your head, just give me one, like Blade Runner or
Oh,
Star
Blade Runner
Trek
for
or.
sure. Star Trek, a big fan of Star Trek. In fact, I invoke Star Trek, but I also like things that are quite dystopian. I don't know why. And I know they're
Hmm,
not science fiction, but they're sort of in a like a sister genre. So I loved the Mad Max movies. To me, they're the
mm-hmm.
counterpoint. Like you need to
Yeah,
know what the other side looks like if things don't become the
yeah,
futuristic, so yeah, so I love the Mad Max movie, but I love Star Trek because Star Trek is sort of the ideal future society, right?
yeah, exactly.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's interesting. One Star Trek or Star Wars is very often a question. Are you Star Trek or are you Star Wars? Which is your
I
favorite?
do
Yeah.
like Star Wars. I do like it quite a bit, and I'll watch every single one of those movies, obviously. But not like Star Trek. I think Star Trek is more
Mhm.
I also learned a lot about diplomacy through Star Trek.
Hmm, interesting.
You know,
Now that's
all
a
the things.
first.
Oh, there's a whole, I should send you some of the musings we've published around Star Trek diplomacy. But also, every single thing we've imagined in terms of innovation has probably been imagined in a Star Trek episode.
Yeah, this
I
is
could
very
wax
true.
lyrical all day about this.
Okay, well, we don't have all day because we're coming close to the end, and I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. One is, where can our listeners go to find out more about you and about your work and about the company? Where can they go? Where should they go?
Well, our publication, being one, diplomaticcourier.com, and there you'll find a little link that takes you to the World in 2050, which is our sister initiative, where we study five mega trends. And so there's a little bit for everybody there, but these mega trends were chosen um, as a course of study for us, and they guide a lot of our editorial coverage because they're so interconnected. Everything from exponential technologies to the future of well being and health to
Hmm.
governance and institutions eroding and changing and devolving to the energy transition and what it means. To education and work and the pipeline between the two and how that's shifting. All of these looked at together are the kinds of things that if you solve one, you can solve for the other. And this is the
Yep,
reason we've kind of conceptualized our work that way.
that's great. That's really cool. I'll have to go check it out again. I haven't checked it out for a while, I have to say, but we'll go and take a look at that. So, is there something, Anna, I should have asked you that I did not ask you?
I don't know. When you asked me about science, what my favorite movies were, I will tell you my favorite story that started my love for science fiction, maybe. And that
Oh,
was
that sounds cool.
Isaac Asimov's Nightfall. And I revisited it recently because someone asked me what was one piece of literature that really resonates in the modern age. That
Hmm,
it's been 70 something years and it still kind of makes sense for society now. And I would say Nightfall was one of those pivotal
interesting.
stories for me.
I'm going to order that I have not read that in ages.
Yes, and especially with the work you guys are doing, Chris. When you think about sustainability and climate change, that
Hmm.
story resonates so much because it is an impending, they're talking about this impending doom, right? And there's a conversation between those who deny it versus those who are like, it's coming in a few hours, what are we going to do? And that the train that is you see coming, but then there's still debate about it, right? So it resonates with the modern times.
I appreciate, really, truly appreciate very much that you bring that up because I will go get that. So, is there a message or a challenge you would like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I'll go back to our roots and,
Hmm.
sort of the the guide, the sticky note I have on my computer that says, help, what are you going to do to help the future arrive well today? So now we probably have a lot of people around us that gravitate to us because they love the future. They're
Hmm.
optimists by design. They want to work towards that. But again, going back to what you do today matters a lot more. So so ask yourself every day, what am I going to do today to help the future I desire arrive well? Maybe that's the
That's,
challenge.
I love that, Anna. Thank you. Really, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us today, for sharing your story, and also mean sincerely for the choices you have made to have crafted a life that truly matters. And so I'd like to propose a toast as we close to our collective future.
Here's to that. Thank you, Chris. Really
Cheers,
appreciate being
Anna.
here.
Thank you so much for listening today. It's really been a pleasure to share this story with you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon and meeting our next guest. And as always, do something today that makes a difference in somebody's life. Choose to matter.